Alright, now how y'all doing? So the book I want to go over with y'all today is called 1984 by George Orwell. And it's a book, well, it's by George Orwell, the author, and it's a book I've read in the past when I was in high school. And I believe I've grown to actually start to like this author a little bit more, George Orwell, because I also read a book by his called Animal Farm, right? And that one is a different book for a different time, which I'll break down. But this book is one I read back in high school, but I decided to read it again because I believe we live in during a time period where there's not only and I'm gonna stop saying I think, it's because we are living during a time period where there's a high level of censorship, but also a heightened level of surveillance. And I think when we talk about AI and the technological advancements or progression we are making as a society, one thing we tend often not to speak about is the expense that it come at. And what I mean by expense, not necessarily cost and value, but the lack of privacy, surveillance, people starting to internalize the gaze of authority, and starting to conform to certain ways of behavior without even having to be told, right? Silencing. What I mean by that is people not speaking to certain matters. It's like I'm starting to see a lot of people conform, but we also seen the attack on media about a new administration. But this is something that has always been going on, right? Whenever a genocide was to take place, the first thing he did was ban their books, get rid of their scholars, and taught to silence those that wanted to critique and speak out against the new governing authorities, right? So I want to break down this book, 1984, and the question I pose as if I was writing like an essay, and I propose a thesis, like, are we living during the time of 1984? And what I essentially mean is like, are we living during a time period where we are being surveilled, where we are starting to see people scared to speak upon matters that confront what the new authoritative people in positions are trying to implement as a form of thought? Is our thoughts being governed? Do we have privacy? Right? There's various questions that just come up, right? And what I wanted to start this video off with is first because I heard Elon Musk make a statement earlier this year. He said, in 10 to 20 years from now, labor or work would be a choice. It would be optional, something that we would not have to do, but we can choose to do if we wanted to. And I thought about it, and it made me think about this book as I was reading it because it just puts some things into context, and it's ironic because I guess they would consider this book not to be like a nonfiction book, one that's more I don't know exactly the category it fall in, but I give it more like a scientific, uh, yeah, uh, one of those type of books. But I encourage you to read it. So I'm gonna read this part of the book. It's on page 201 for those that have it. And I'm going to start from the point where I believe it gets juicy. So it says, throughout recorded time. Oh, let's start. It says, chapter 1, ignorance is strength. Throughout recorded time, and probably since the end of Neolithic age, there has been three kinds of people in the world: the high, the middle, and the low. They have been subdivided into many ways. They have borne countless different names, and their relative numbers, as well as their attitude toward one another, have varied from age to age. But the essential structure of society has never altered. Even after enormous uphills and seemingly irrevocable changes, the same pattern has always reasserted itself. Just as a gyroscope will always return to equilibrium, however far it is pushed one way or the other. Julie, are you awake? Said Winston. Yes, my love, I'm listening. Go on, it's marvelous. He continued reading. So Winston is actually reading a book right now. And Winston's one of the main characters in the book 1984, and he was given a book by a group that wants to take down this authoritative government. And this is what he's reading. So the aims of these three groups are entirely irreconcilable. The aim of the high is to remain where they are. The aim of the middle is to change places with the high. The aim of the low, when they have an aim, for it is a abiding characteristic of the low that they are too much crushed by drudgery to be more than intermittently conscious of anything outside of their daily lives, is to abolish all distinctions and create a society in which all men shall be equal. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to continue, right? Or let's continue, then I'll trace back. Thus, throughout history, a struggle which is the same in its main outlines reoccurs over and over again. For long periods, the high seem to be securely in power, but sooner or later there always comes a moment where they lose either their belief in themselves or the capacity to govern efficiently, or both. They are often overthrown by the middle, who enlist the low on their side by pretending to them that they are fighting for liberty and justice. As soon as they have reached their objective, the middle thrust the low back into their old position of servitude and themselves become the high. Presently, a new middle group splits off from one of the other groups or from both of them, and the struggle begins over again. Of the three groups, only the low are never temporarily successful in achieving their aims. It would be an exaggeration to say that throughout history there has been progress of a material kind. Even today, in a period of decline, the average human being is physically better off than he was a few centuries ago, but no advance in wealth, no softening of manners, no reform or revolution have ever brought human equality a milliliter nearer. From the point of view of the lower, no historic change has ever meant much more than a change in the name of their masters. I mean, that's a handful, and there's so much to break down. And it's ironic how this book that's like a dystopia makes so many correlations and speak to some of the things I believe we are going through today, right? And the reason why I'm even saying it that way, because I think a lot of times we think like nonfiction books are books that often inform us upon reality. But I've come to understand that there's different genres of literature that also, even though it may be like a mystical world, maybe a dystopia, maybe things that we categorize outside of nonfiction, often have certain principles and stories in it that we can learn from. So I just wanted to come to this first part where it says like there's three groups that are entirely irretrievable, right? But I really want to get to it says the aim of the low, when they have an aim, for it is an abiding characteristic of the low, that they are too much crushed by judgery to be more than intermittently conscious of anything outside of their daily lives, is to abolish all distinctions and create a society in which all men shall be equal. I think about it in this way because I come from a working class family. When they mention the low, I think of like proletarians, but mostly the working class. And in it, how I broke this down was that it was saying that the low, if when they have an aim, when they're not focused just on merely their day-to-day conditions, ought to be to remove anything that distracts them from what's the word I want to use, from freeing themselves of their conditions, right? And it made me think about why I even start off the Elon Musk statement, because I think when Elon Musk says that there will come a time where, you know, labor is optional and that we have universal income is one of the things he states, meaning that there's gonna be like this equilibrium and no form of like class distinctions. What I think people fail to acknowledge in that statement itself, if a world was to happen like that what it will happen is that it allows those that are working class to be able to have time to think. And what I want us to know is that capitalism, or a system built upon monetizing, commoditizing everything, the only way it's sustained is not just through a working class, but it's through being able to control the thinking of the working class. And if we was to get into a world where we have an equilibrium, where there is no class distinctions and there is no hunger, no starvation, no poverty, that allows those that were once considered to be proletarians have time to think. And the moment a time to think occurs and we begin to question our circumstances and our conditions, that leads to revolutions. Right? So what I want us to know is that the way in which you maintain a slave is not by necessarily controlling his thought, but controlling what it is that he thinks about. Carter G. Woodson once stated that if you can control what a man shall think, you don't have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you can determine what a man shall think, you have to worry about his action. You don't have to worry about his action. And he said that if you can make a man feel like he's justly inferior, you don't have to order him to take the back door, for he will go without being told. And if there is no back door, his just nature would demand one. And what he's saying is the same thing in his book, or what I was saying in regards to controlling thought, is that the moment you control what it is that a person thinks about, you control their actions, for their actions only a byproduct of how it is that they think, right? And I think I just wanted to talk about that because we talk about AI, we talk about technology, we talk about this idea of a world where labor is optional. If that was to happen, I want us to understand that the working class would then be able to think. And even more, I want to emphasize our ability or our need to get our young men and women that come from working class households to actually become critical thinkers and become more conscious. Whether we are in a class society or not, the fear of a capitalist system or what breaks it down is when you start to have a conscious labor class. And I want to make sure I emphasize that because I started teaching at schools, and I could put the book down at this point, but I was teaching and facilitating a conversation just around culture appropriation, the need to understand history, where things come from, and knowing that just because it's a trend don't mean that you ought to be following, and know that there's things that have cultural significances that we tend to adapt just because it's trendy. And it is offensive to many people. And a few students like, yo, bro, we in 2025, who cares about that? Like, just do as you please, do what you want. Like, and I sat there and I thought about it. I'm like, another part of in this book is talking about those who control the past or the historical documentation also control the present. And I think about this time period where we are seeing that there's a particular segment or a particular demographic of the new generation that no longer have an inclination to want to understand history. Like it's like a disregard, like, yo, bro, we in 2025, who cares about slavery? Prime example. And what I know is the what is detrimental or what comes at the expense of that frame of thinking is that you can then get them to no longer see any type of significance or value first in their own culture, but also in the adaptation of cultures that are not of theirs. And it just makes me think that we have to get our youth to start to become more critical thinkers, to value first themselves, their history, and also their contribution. And the young men and women I was teaching, for the most part, were black, right? And I believe definitely as us as young black men and women, we definitely become more critical of our conditions, become more inclined and willing to learn about our history. For if we allow ourselves to be made to feel as if history no longer is important and we just need to take the present for what it is, we start to think that the times that we lived in was always what it was. And that's a whole nother point. What I think that the youth have come to think is that like they were born into a time period where everything that they have received was always what it was. Like if you was born in slavery, for the most part, it's like, how do you know you enslaved when this is all that you know? Right? And I think what I'm seeing amongst the new generation, which I am a part of, and then Gen X, is that they no longer inquire the question, what was before it is, what was before it was today? Like, how did we get to today? I try to always get my classes when I teach to think about the fact that how the world is today wasn't always what it was. We didn't always have law enforcement. We didn't always have skyscrapers, right? Like, just the question, the small things. Communities wasn't always divided based on racial demographics. Redlining occurred. But in order for us to even get there, you have to first get them to want to question their reality. And often the questioning comes from the exposure of something new. I asked them even about like gun controls we was talking about. And I said, do y'all know like do y'all even know about the Black Panther Party, right? I said, like, do you believe black people should own guns? Do you think there's a difference between when white people have guns, we call it patriotic, but when black people have guns, we consider it a threat? Some people agree, some people didn't. I gave them an example of the Black Panther Party when they went to the Capitol in 1976. And they went there with their firearms and how they passed the Mulford Act, Mulford Act, in order to say that you no longer open carry, because they seen them black people with their firearms, right? But if we never expose them to history, we start to think that the world was always what it is today. And I think the first step to building critical thinking is first get them to question their reality, right? The next part of this, what I want to talk about, is the state of surveillance, right? A big part of this book is that people or the citizens in what they call Oceania is daily monitored. Like they have a thing called Big Brother. You may hear the word Big Brother, and what it signifies is like a surveillance, right? Even I'm gonna play this video if I can add it to it. There's a video of when the Macintosh Apple, the first Apple laptop, I won't even call it a computer, was created, was the Macintosh. And this happened in, I want to get the exact date. It was actually 1984 at the Super Bowl. And there's a commercial that was created where a woman came, she threw like this hammer at the screen, and she cracked the screen, and what the screen was symbolic of was Big Brother. But Big Brother comes from also this book, 1984. So there's various correlations that's being put into commercials, but if we don't necessarily tie these things together, it's hard for us to realize. And I'm going to play part of the commercial here.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests, obeying contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like...
But what I want us to know is even after watching this commercial is knowing that we are being surveilled, right? And when I said like we live in a state of surveillance, I start thinking about various things. I thought about when Jaylen Brown on the Celtics, where he talked about the panopticon, which was a term that was seen in a book by Michael Foucault. And what he meant by the panopticon was like this idea that there was a tower that prisoners could see, but inside the guards could see out and they could see in, but the prisoners only could see the tower, right? So it was this idea of like an internalization of the gaze of authority, where people started to internalize a certain act and behavior without even knowing whether it's being surveilled or not, right? Without any form of coercion. And to make it simple, it's like it could be 2 a.m. in the morning and we are stopped at the stop sign, even though there be no police around. It's like we have started to internalize this gaze of authority or being watched, that even when there is no authority presence, we still move as if we are being governed. Let me simplify it. Even after the oppressor leaves, we still act in a manner as if we are still oppressed. Even after there is no authority, we act in a manner as if authority is present. And that's where the internalization comes. Like, we have to stop at the stop sign because we believe that we are breaking the law. But who's to say you break? Who's gonna know is the thing. Not even if you're breaking the law. And I'm not encouraged to break laws, but knowing that law was something that we was conditioned to believe in and to follow, even that when authority is not present, we still follow the law. Well, some, right? And that was an idea. But I thought about this state of surveillance. I started thinking about technology. I thought about Tesla. We say we want to go like zero emission 2050, but then I think about Tesla has a car full of cameras, which means that the entire parking lot is being surveilled if we was to fill out the parking lot with Tesla. The second part to it is I think of like Siri or Alexa in your house. How these devices can be on 24 hours recording what's taking place in the house, whether you gave it consent to do so or not. And the last one I thought was like cell towers, where they can use cell towers to determine the location of where victims were at in certain crime cases at a certain time based on the location of their cellular device. It's a whole state of surveillance, but I don't think we ever thought of that. We think of Apple. I think one of the biggest figures of surveillance. They have not just our fingerprint, not just our facial recognition, but our data, where we shop, how we shop. If Apple wanted to create a, what we call those, a clone of us, they could. We gave them access to do so, actually. And I don't think we ever read the documentations or the terms and conditions whenever we disagreed. And I just think about how we under a system of surveillance. And the last part, it was in the book, and I encourage y'all to read it again, there's a term called doublethink. And what it means is holding two opposing thoughts simultaneously. And I ask that, or I bring that up because I'm an individual that often have two opposing thoughts. And the biggest one is like in regards to capitalism. While I believe that money is essential, or should I say, I don't want to use the word money, I want to say currency is important in different governments or different nations. Like currency is important. But in regards to capitalism, I believe money is important. I do believe that we have also entered a time period where we have normalized the investing into companies and turned a blind eye to the exploitation that they serve as an accomplice to, right? And often I have two opposing thoughts. Like, yes, I need to make money. Yes, I should invest in the stock market. But at the same time, am I benefiting off the exploitation of the Congo, of Sudan, of Sierra Leone, when we investing in gold, when we investing in diamonds, when we investing in Tesla that's built off of cobalt? It's like I'm too serving as an accomplice in a system that I'm against. Yet I understand the importance of knowing how the capitalist system works, understanding the importance of being a business owner, and understanding the governing laws around economics. So I often have like this two opposing thoughts. And if there's anybody that think the same way or feel the same way, I'd love to have a conversation around that. It's like, how do we operate in the capitalist system knowing that we are serving as an accomplice, but yet saying that we are freedom fighters or activists, fighting for or fighting against the injustice imposed upon our people, definitely as Black and African Americans. So that's just one of the thoughts. But these are all the things that just came from this book alone, which can tell you how powerful the book is and why I encourage you to read it. I'm going to break down Animal Farm on a later date, but I definitely just wanted to ask us, do we believe that we live in during 1984, where we are under this idea of surveillance, where there is a big brother? And I'm actually going to end with a quote that a professor told me at Syracuse University. We were taking what class was this? I want to say economics. I can't actually recall what class it was, but I remember the professor. And he asked us, he was like, yo, what are the products that like Google, Facebook, Instagram, what product do they sell? And I told him, I was like, yo, be honest with you, they don't sell a product. And he laughed. He said, if you can't determine what the product is, that means that you are the product. And he said it seriously. And I sat there and thought about it. And I giggled. I said, but I giggled more like the giggle when you like, and you shocked, like, oh. Like I was struck by thought. And what I want us to know is that in many ways we are the product as individuals. And if we do not raise up an intellectual or a thinking class, we're going to have a class or emerging generations of slaves. And when I mean slaves, not necessarily just being in bondage and, in shackle, but enslaved being that we no longer question our circumstances and people control the way we think, for we don't even question what it is that we're being made to think. So I'm going to end it there, and I look forward to y'all joining, subscribing, and sharing this video, also commenting. Boys.